The Netflix documentary about Madeleine promised to tell everything, but what if the most revealing parts never made it to the screen? In this video, we're going to expose what was left out, real evidence, ignored contradictions, and decisions that change everything, but were silently cut. Get ready to see what the world never saw. Imagine an editing room at the end of a long day. The monitor still glows with final cuts, but it's on the floor where the real story lies. Dozens of discarded clips, interview snippets no one will hear, footage that will never see the light of day. Silence. The digital scissors didn't just cut, they decided what the world would call the truth. That's where it all begins, in what was left out. When you finished the Netflix documentary about Madeleine McCann, you probably felt like you'd seen everything. The impeccable production, the emotional soundtrack, the perfectly timed testimonies, like something out of a movie. But what if the most important part of the story was never shown? Not denied, not debunked, simply cut. Perhaps the scariest thing isn't what was shown, but what was omitted so carefully that almost no one noticed. Official testimonies that don't appear, court decisions that vanished, an entire report that no one mentioned, details that weren't missing, but for some reason didn't fit the narrative. And what does that say about what we were given? Because when a story this global is told with such power, what's left out says more about the system than any line in the final cut. The truth may have been reduced to what fit comfortably on the screen, and the rest like was left on the floor, forgotten. Behind the lens, there was another pain, a pain that was never staged for the camera. It didn't sell. It was too raw, too real, too uncomfortable, and that's exactly why it was left out. The questions no one wanted to hear, the evidence no one had the courage to frame, the contradictions that clashed with the polished emotional tone of the series. It's as if the silence was chosen with more care than any soundtrack. And the worst part? Most of us watched and believed because it felt true. But if you look closer, you'll see there was something there that wasn't. The documentary ended, but maybe the real truth hasn't even begun. In this video, we're going to pick up the pieces left on the floor, one by one. And what you're about to see wasn't on the screen, but it was in the files. If this bothers you, then you need to stay. Not everything cut from a documentary. Fair's irrelevant. Sometimes it's the exact opposite. It's what's too uncomfortable, what could break the planned narrative, what doesn't fit the format that pleases the audience. And when we're talking about a production with Netflix's reach, every cut carries weight and a reason. The documentary about the Madeleine McCann case grabs you right away. Slow motion shots, dramatic reconstructions, paused voices that heighten the tension. Everything feels so well crafted that you feel immersed in the story. But that's where the danger lies. Because behind every aesthetic choice, there was an editorial one. Some decisions are obvious: screen time, pacing, narrative focus. But others are less visible and more dangerous. For example, the documentary simply doesn't mention that Kate McCann, Madeleine's mother, refused to answer 48 police questions. This isn't a minor detail. It's an objective fact officially documented, and yet it was cut. The answer doesn't lie in the truth, it lies in the format. A production like this doesn't just deal with facts, it deals with what's tellable, with what doesn't threaten the central narrative thread. And the narrative here was clear: empathy for the parents, focus on police mistakes, omission of contradictions. There were also court decisions that never appeared. Lawsuits involving former Inspector Gonzalo Amaral, rulings that contradicted the open-ended tone the series built. All of that was left out, as if it never existed. But it did. The truth in this case wasn't erased. It was trimmed, polished, made up, and reduced to what fit on the screen. Now, what does that tell you? Productions like this aren't just audiovisual works. They're political constructions, strategic. They choose what to show with the same precision they use to choose what to hide. And that part, the part left out, says a lot about who's controlling the story. For example, the sniffer dog report, which detected the scent of blood in the car rented by the McCanns weeks after the disappearance, wasn't explored in depth. There are records, photos, reports, but none of it made it to the screen. Why hide something so visual, so documented? Maybe because it would create doubt. And doubt doesn't pair well with empathy. A doubt like that would disrupt the entire emotional structure of the series. It would shift the focus from the main thesis, and worse, it would put the viewer in an uncomfortable position. The documentary didn't want that. It wanted identification. It wanted emotion without conflict. It wanted you to finish believing, not questioning. But that's exactly where the invisible cut comes in. Every time a fact like this is suppressed, something is rewritten. The story doesn't just change in what it shows, but in what it chooses to keep silent. And it's that silence, elegant, well-lit, with background music and precise editing, that builds a subtle lie. And if the silence was chosen, then what was it trying to avoid? That's the point. Because what the series didn't say wasn't irrelevant. It was too explosive to fit the format. As if the audience couldn't handle the full truth. As if the truth needed to be filtered, balanced, pasteurized. But now with these pieces that were cut, something is revealed. Maybe the real documentary isn't the one we watched, but the one we're piecing together now. Piece by piece. Silence by silence. And if you've felt this discomfort growing so far, then maybe what's coming next won't surprise you, but it will finally confirm what you've been suspecting since the first episode. The twist doesn't come with shouts. It comes with a document. Page 36 of the official Judicial Police report. Cold, direct, impersonal. But one paragraph is enough to dismantle everything the documentary built with such aesthetic care. It's recorded there. Specialized sniffer dogs, one trained to detect the scent of a corpse, another for traces of human blood, reacted inside the McCann's apartment, in the trunk of the car they rented weeks later, and on Kate's clothes. This isn't a theory, it's written, dated, signed, with attached photos. And yet the documentary chose not to show it. Instead, it opted for dramatic reconstructions, emotional testimonies, and a swelling soundtrack. It chose empathy over doubt. It chose for you to feel, not to question. Now tell me, why was this left out? The answer isn't in journalism, it's in the narrative. Because a Netflix series isn't a criminal investigation. It's an audiovisual product with a beginning, middle, end, and above all, a protagonist you're supposed to care about. And if the audience starts to suspect, the structure collapses. But when we pick up that piece left on the editing room floor and put it back on the table, everything changes. The scent of blood, the silence of the 48 unanswered questions, the parents' refusal to participate in the documentary. None of it is light, none of it is convenient, and maybe that's why it was cut. But the truth has a strange way of not dying easily. It lingers, waiting for someone to come back and pick it up. And now that you've read this, you can't unsee it. When we confront this kind of omission, it feels like betrayal. But not just any betrayals, it's the kind that comes with soft music, perfect cinematography, and a voice narrating as if everything's already resolved. The series claims that no concrete evidence links the parents to the disappearance, and indeed no conviction was made. But what it doesn't say is that the Portuguese police at the time formally considered them suspects. That's documented. Too, Dan, but it never made it to the screen. Because the cut was strategic. It wasn't for lack of time, it was for convenience. Showing that would require a narrative balance the series might not have been willing to risk. It would require dealing with a divided audience, exposed to an uncomfortable truth. It would require telling a story without ready-made heroes. And so they made another choice, to edit. But editing isn't neutral. With every piece cut, another story is built. And in this case, the story built wasn't false, but it was incomplete. And what isn't said sometimes weighs more than what's said with all the words. Now imagine yourself sitting there, re-watching the episodes with this new piece in hand. That scene where the narrative softens the tension, where the parents are portrayed as absolute victims, it now carries another layer, a glaring absence. And no matter how well made the production was, once you realize what was left out, it all loses its shine. Some things only hurt when you find out too late, as if the truth was there all along, but no one had the courage to tell it fully. Maybe the cruelest thing isn't the lie, it's what was left in silence. And what that reveals and isn't the end yet. It's just the beginning of everything that was silenced. The editing room has been cleared out, the files archived, the narrative packaged with music, emotions, and a comforting resolution. But now that we've picked up the pieces left on the floor, the story shifts, because it's no longer about what was said, it's about what was left out. Confronted with 48 questions. 48. All tied to the moment of her daughter's disappearance, she refused to answer. None of those questions appear in the documentary. No attempt to contextualize the silence. No pause to question. Can you imagine anyone else in any other case being treated like this? Another ignored silence. The official Portuguese police report, which included direct mentions of suspicions about the parents themselves. It wasn't a random tabloid suggestion. It was a formal investigation, documented in public records, still suppressed. The documentary took another path. It chose the version that moves you, not the one that unsettles, because the unsettling one is hard to film. It has no clear hero, no easy villain, and it demands something the audience might not be ready to receive, doubt. But now, with each of these pieces placed back on the table, the picture doesn't disappear. It reappears, flawed, yes, painful too, but honest. The reconstruction isn't pretty. It doesn't bring comfort, it doesn't end with relief, but it offers something rarer, the chance to think for yourself. And in this new scenario, the viewer stops being an audience. They become part of the stitching, because when you watch the documentary without knowing what was left out, you consume a story. But when you discover the cuts, you take on responsibility. There was a woman, a hotel employee, who said something strange. The babysitter wasn't there at the time they said she was. That testimony was collected. It's in the records, but it wasn't used. There was also mention of an intercepted email where the McCanns spoke with a British politician, and the content suggested a closer connection than would be natural. In a case like this, all of this was available. Not hidden, not secret, just ignored. And now, after all this, tell me, what do you do with a story that was told halfway? You pick it up. You gather the pieces, even if they don't fit perfectly, even if the result isn't beautiful, because that's where the new symbol of this story comes in. The cut that mutilated now becomes the cut that accuses. Those scissors that chose what fit the screen become evidence. The absence becomes presence. What was discarded becomes an accusation, and you don't need to shout for it to hurt. You just need to look straight at it. Some things only take shape when you see what was left out. And now that you've seen that it's impossible to watch that documentary the same way again, justice might never come in the traditional way. Maybe it never will. But memory, that we can rebuild. And every forgotten piece is now a reclaimed part of justice. Some things only make sense when the silence starts to scream. And maybe this video didn't show you something new, but it made you hear what was never said. It's strange, isn't it? How something that didn't appear on the screen can weigh as much as what did. How what wasn't said leaves a deeper mark than the perfect speeches. How the absence in place of evidence bothers more than the presence of a lie. Because now, it's no longer about what Netflix showed, it's about what they chose to hide. And the truth is this: it wasn't for lack of space. It was out of fear of disruption. Throughout the video, we didn't accuse anyone, but we also didn't close our eyes to anything. Because when it comes to a missing child, a life torn from the world in silence, you can't treat it as a spectacle, and you can't turn everything into a polished narrative just to keep the audience comfortable. You saw the questions that went unanswered. You saw the documents left out. You saw the invisible cut, made with surgical precision to keep the story digestible, rounded, emotional, safe. But real life isn't safe, nor rounded. It bleeds at the edges. There's a part of me that wishes this had all been just an editing mistake, that the cuts were innocent, that the silence was an oversight, not a decision. But after reading, watching, cross-referencing data, and seeing names disappear from the screen, it's impossible to hold on to that hope. The truth was, edited with purpose, with strategy, with fear of discomfort. And here's what gets me the most: behind this editing, there are people who've grown used to the silence, who watch, feel, comment, and move on with their lives, as if the Madeleine case were just another title in the catalogue. But those who saw the invisible cut, they can't watch the same way anymore, because now the image is full of holes, and it's in those holes that we start to truly see. I'll confess something. When I finished writing this script, I closed the file and sat in silence. For minutes. I don't even know how. Much time passed. I kept imagining what it would be like if it were me, if it were my daughter, if it was someone I love. And if the world decided to tell that story only as far as it was convenient. Some things only hurt for real, when you realize the pain was edited to fit on a screen. And now, Here's the part that matters. Because after all this, you have a choice. You can let this story die again, as so many have died on the editing room floor, or you can be part of those who pick it up, who rescue it, who refuse to accept the cut as final. If you've made it this far, I need to tell you something. What you just watched isn't a video. It's a piece of justice the world tried to forget, and you now have seen it, and what we do with what we see changes everything. If this moved you, the super chat is there as a way to say, I saw it too. It's not just support, it's belonging, it's a seal, it's silence turned into action, and everyone who leaves that mark here isn't just supporting the channel. They're saying, this story is mine too. Oh, and before you go, if you want to understand why some truths vanish suddenly, the next video will show you one even more uncomfortable. Not because it's worse, but because no one has ever had the courage to tell it to the end. And if you felt what I felt here, you need to see what's coming next. I also want to ask you something personal. If you've stayed this far, comment. Below I saw the invisible cut. It might seem like just a phrase, but to me it's a sign that you were with me, that you saw what they cut, that you won't let this memory vanish again. Now, I want to know what this stirred in you. What was the part that hit you the hardest? What's still lingering in your mind after the video ended? Write it. It can be just a line, a word, but let it be real, because this isn't a script, it's a story. And real stories don't end when the video does. If you felt this, if you connected with this, subscribe. Not for me, but because more is coming. And I don't want you to miss what the world has already tried to erase. Some things are only understood by those who've lived them. And some cuts we never forget. I'm Name. And what you just watched wasn't just a video. It was a cut recovered from the room of forgetting, and now it's yours too. Silence, breathe. Now write. I'm here reading every word, and if it hurt, it's because it still matters.